Now let us talk about handling the shrinkage. You know shrinkage is very fragile item. You can't afford to have it to be damaged during the handling process. It is also sensitive to the moisture. If possible, you will need to avoid direct contact between your fingers and the shrinkage sensitive element part. This video is going to discuss about how do you properly handle shrinkage in order to avoid damage as well as inaccurate measurements given by the shrinkage. First is about unpacking the shrinkage. That means you are taking out the shrinkage from the package. There are two main types of shrinkage. One is ordinary gauge, which comes with the shrinkage alone without any lead wire. Another one, it will be integral lead wire gauge. That means it is already custom made. The shrinkage comes together with the lead wire. Now let us talk about the ordinary shrinkage. Once you open the package, it should look something like this. There is no wire attached to the shrinkage, and it is normally packed in the laminated pad gauge binder. The binder will open when pressed against the thumb, and then pull the shrinkage out from the binder using a pair of tweezers. Something like this. Handle the gauge with the gauge lead instead of having any direct contact to the shrinkage surface. The shrinkage itself is very small and very light. If possible, you use the tweezer to deal with the shrinkage. Another type of shrinkage, it will be integral lead wire shrinkage. The shrinkage come together with the lead wire. There will also be gauge binder, which looks something like this. Open the binder before taking out the shrinkage. Once the shrinkage is out of the binder, handle it by the lead wire. Do not have direct contact with the shrinkage. Now if you need to pull the lead wire of a integral lead wire shrinkage, unbind the shrinkage by lightly grasping the lead wire and pull the lead wire close to the shrinkage. Something like this. Do not have direct contact with the shrinkage. You should not hold on the gauge lead here while pulling, as this part is very fragile. So if you handle with the lead wire, hold onto the lead wire without inducing any force onto the fragile part of the shrinkage. Next is about the bonding surface of the shrinkage. There are two sides of the shrinkage. The sensitive elements of the shrinkage will be on top of the shrinkage. This sensitive element should not have direct contact to your test specimen. You have to attach the shrinkage to the test specimen using the right side of the shrinkage. There is a front side and the back side. The front side will have the sensitive element on top, while the back side it will be under the gauge base. Now you will need to attach the shrinkage by spreading the adhesive over the back of the gauge base. That means the adhesive, it will be under the gauge base, and the sensitive element should head upward. Now applying the adhesive to the wrong surface will cause imperfect insulations and reduce the strength sensitivity. This you need to be careful. Now how do you identify which side is which? You may look at the sensitive element. The shiny side should be heading outward. You have two types of the gauges, wire gauge and foil gauge. The face with the gauge list protrusions is the front side, or you may refer to its logo. As for the foil gauge, the glossy or shiny side should be heading outward, and the face of gauge list protrusions is the front side. We are looking at this one, and also the locations of your gauge lid. And this shall be above the gauge base. This is the gauge base. Next, we proceed with the cleaning of the strain gauge. Normally, strain gauges are thoroughly cleaned before being packed into the gauge binder. You don't really need to do any cleaning to the strain gauge. And the gauge binder, which is this, prevent the strain gauge from the dirt and impurity. However, if you found any impurities or dirt on the strain gauge, you may wipe off the dirt with a cotton tip or industrial tissue soaked in lignoline. While doing this, you need to be very careful. Normally, you don't need to deal with that. Do not hold the gauge base with your bare hands, as this may induce pressure to the gauge base, altering the shape of the gauge base, causing undesired deformations to the sensitive elements of the strain gauge. This may affect the quality of bond between the strain gauge and the test specimen, and also may lead to the damage of the sensitive element, resulting in inaccurate measurements. In terms of the storage of the strain gauge, it should be stored in a dry locations protected from the direct sunlight. The best procedure of you, it will be only taking out the strain gauge that you need from the package, while the remaining remain in the packages. These are the conditions where the strain gauge can no longer be used. First is the strain gauges with crested gauge base. That means now the gauge base here is not flat, it is slightly curved, or if there is any folding in terms of the gauge base, this kind of strain gauge cannot be used anymore, as it is a very sensitive element. This will affect the accuracy of the measurement. Although it is still possible for you to have the strain gauge to be attached to the test specimen, now you feel skeptical with the results. You cannot guarantee a good adhesion between the gauge base and the test specimen. Without a perfect adhesion, the strength developed within the test specimen will need to be effectively conveyed to the strain gauge. Now, if the adhesion is not effective, what is measured in the strain gauge may not reflect the actual strength of the test specimen. Another one, if the gauge base has already been folded and there are marks there, this may lead to the damage to the sensitive element. This kind of damage may not be easily seen by naked eyes. Now the problem goes back to you. How confident are you with the result as given by the strain gauge later when you do the testing? To avoid this kind of complications, you have no choice but to forego this strain gauge and use a new one. That's why while handling the strain gauge, you need to be extremely careful. It is very sensitive and fragile, and it is expensive. Next, the damaged strain gauge cannot be used anymore. It may or may not give you reading. The severely damaged strain gauge may not have any reading. Some slightly damaged strain gauge may give you some reading. Now the problem, it will be the accuracy. Next one, it will be the strain gauge that has already been unsuccessfully installed. If you did not install it carefully and the installation was found unsuccessful, removing the strain gauge and this removed shrinkage can no longer be used. As during the process of installations, applying the adhesive and then removing the shrinkage, you cannot ensure the shrinkage come perfectly in one piece. This again will affect the accuracy of the measurement, even though it gives you the readings. Another one, it will be the shrinkage for which the type name and the lot number cannot be verified. Probably this is referring to the pirated products, where the quality of the shrinkage and its accuracy may be questionable. Next, it will be handling the datasheet supply with the gauge package. Normally, in each package of the shrinkage, there will be datasheet. We discussed about this previously. It should look something like this. The datasheet is important for you to do the corrections for the measurements. Take note of the shrinkage characteristic as written in the gauge package as well as the datasheet. There will be specifications as well as correcting curve under different temperatures. You will need those informations for you to compute the strength based on the measurements given by the shrinkage. Now, if you are returning a shrinkage to its gauge package, make sure you do not mix up the gauge type and the lots. Later, the specification got mixed up and leads to inaccurate computations of the strength. Next one is about the release film used during installations. The release film looks something like this, a square piece of paper. This is a special kind of paper that you use while handling the shrinkage adhesives. You want to prevent your direct contact with the shrinkage as well as with the adhesive. While installing the shrinkage, and when you apply the adhesive under the gauge base, you will need to attach the shrinkage to the test specimen. You will need to apply pressure on the shrinkage, but you cannot have direct contact with the shrinkage. You will place this release film in between your shrinkage and your hand while inducing pressure onto the shrinkage. You may use thumb pressure or use shrinkage clamp. Both ways will require this release film. It shall be placed on top of the shrinkage in order to prevent any direct contact with the shrinkage as well as with the adhesive. The pressure together with this release film shall be released after the adhesive hardens. There are various types of release film which are applicable for different types of adhesive.